Well, this is going to be a first for me and pretty much a first in the country. A cultivated meat, lab-grown Scotch egg. I wonder what it's going to taste like. Well, this week on the show, we're in the plush surroundings of Fortnum & Mason's because they've decided to experiment with a cultivated meat Scotch egg. Does this suggest such novel foods have taken a step forward? Also on the show, as President Biden presses pause on an enormous expansion of liquefied natural gas exports, is it a win for climate activists or just playing politics in an election year? We take you inside the assembly line, getting ready to ditch petrol and switch to electric minis. And how this Lancashire bog is sucking up carbon and making farmers money in the process. But first, we're at the farm where the meat is reared, but this is about as green as it gets, and this place is more about hairnets than wellies. And I've had a knee operation recently, so I'll be getting around on these. They might call themselves a farm, but there's no sign of animals on this trading estate in Oxford. And while there are no pigs in this pig pen, they are producing meat.
This is the beginning of our process, and just like on a farm, we start with that small piece of meat.
From that meat, scientists pick out the cells that they want to replicate. So you've identified your cells. What happens next?
So the next part is that we make sure we've got just the pure muscle and the pure fat cells. So we want to only grow the parts of the animal which we want to eat. So none of the gristly bits, tendon, cartilage, ligaments, etc.
When the cultivated meat cells leave there, their biology, their genetics is, if you like, just right. But how does that actually become a piece of meat? Stage 2.
This is the next stage of the process. It's essentially a mixing tank, and this is the first time those cells will have come from a flask or a petri dish and ended up in something that resembles a production process.
What is actually in there?
So in there we have some beef cells at the moment, some beef muscle stirring around, and then we've got our own culture media formulation, which is the nutrition for the cells, it's food.
So are those cells growing in there all the time?
They are, exactly. So we'll bring those through the process from smaller scales up through larger and larger. As if you would on a farm, you move the herd from a smaller pen to a bigger pen.
After 3 to 4 days, the cells multiply and grow to form small lumps of muscle tissue before being transferred to this stainless steel tank where they continue to swell. And when it's grown up in there, is it you're looking like a fillet steak? I mean, what's actually coming out?
We're not quite at the stage of fillet steaks yet. We will be there in years to come, but what comes out of the process is similar to mincemeat.
A texture that's ideal for something like a Scotch egg. And where better to try a cultured meat Scotch egg than Fortnum & Mason's, the posh London grocer beloved by the royals and creator of the original Scotch egg recipe back in 1738. Well, I can't wait to go for it. Let's do it. Is it right that Fortnum's claims to have invented the Scotch egg?
We do indeed. So over 300 years ago, we apparently did invent it as a way to feed people on the go.
Well, I don't normally eat Scotch eggs with a knife and fork, but given I'm Fortnum's, I feel it was the right thing to do. So here we go. Oh, the egg looks very nice.
Well, I'm going to pick it up as it was originally intended.
Here we go. That is very nice. That is great. It's got some seasoning in there. I can taste some herbs and spices and very nice texture as well. I'm getting a genuinely meaty flavour as well. Do you think it's a significant moment in the evolution of lab-grown meat?
Absolutely. I think that cultivated meat's absolutely sort of in its infancy on the grand scheme of things, and we are unbelievably honoured to be able to create the first ever cultivated meat Scotch egg, and actually to be amongst the first people ever to taste it outside of a lab is a really exciting thing to be part of.
How do you think your customers will react to cultivated meat? I mean, something that was essentially grown in a lab.
It would certainly take a little bit of education because it's new and it's something that we're not used to seeing, and at the moment it feels like one of those very sci-fi things that people can't quite believe is really happening.
Despite this showcase, you won't find it on the shelves here anytime soon. The technology hasn't even been approved by the Food Standards Agency yet, and some experts think this isn't where we should be focusing our efforts. But what do the public think?
I would try lab-grown meat because I'm conscious of how farming meat affects the environment.
That's a hell no from me. I'm going to eat beef. I'd rather it be out in the field eating healthily.
I just don't like the idea of it. I think it sounds weird.
But with the enormous global meat industry facing growing concerns over its greenhouse gas emissions, cultured meat companies and their investors are betting big on a lab-grown future.
Well, there's some quite bullish projections. So AT Kearney, for example, predicted that 35% of all meat could be cultivated by 2040. So meat is a $1.3 trillion industry right now, so that's pretty enormous.
Whether the thought of this arguably lower gilt meat grosses you out or whets your appetite, it might be appearing on our shelves in the not too distant future. Since the war in Ukraine, many countries have tried to wean themselves off dependence on Russian gas. And for European countries, that has meant importing much more liquid natural gas, much of it from the United States. But now, President Biden has announced a pause on pending and future LNG export applications, citing concerns about their environmental impact. The United States exported more liquefied natural gas than any other country in the first half of 2023, the latest period for which data is available. Europe was the main destination, accounting for 2/3 of total exports. The top 5 countries, the Netherlands, UK, France, Spain and Germany, imported 6 billion cubic feet per day. Experts are concerned about the environmental impact of LNG as it primarily consists of methane, that is a fossil fuel, having climate impact when it's burnt. But also there are concerns about methane leakage because it is around 80 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So environmentalists are treating this as a win, but what could it mean for energy security and President Biden's re-election chances in this election year? Well, joining me to talk through this is Casey Merriman from the New York-based analysts Energy Intelligence. Casey, thanks for joining us. First of all, why do you think President Biden has done this?
You mentioned the election coming up, and that's very much front of mind, right? The kind of climate constituency that very much helped elect Joe Biden previously has not necessarily been happy with his track record, right? They have seen oil and gas projects, pipelines be approved. They have seen drilling continue, things of that sort. And a lot have voiced their ire, their frustration, thinking that kind of the Biden administration has let them down in a lot of ways. And so, as we kind of look to a November that is potentially going to be a very, very dogfight election, Joe Biden's administration is looking to try to say, hey, no, come back. I hear you. There are things that we can do. And here's one of them. We're going to put a pause on these projects and make sure that we are taking climate into consideration.
And should it worry in any way countries in Europe? Because there is also another exception, isn't there, for strategic allies of the US, that they will continue getting the gas. So does it matter for them?
Yeah, well, the Biden administration has been trying to really hit home this point that the United States has actually exceeded its own expectations, its own targets for supplying Europe over the past couple years, and that it could continue to do so because of this additional capacity that is already under construction, that's already advancing. The U.S. isn't kind of stopping where it is now. Now, I would say that the response from Europe has been mixed. There has absolutely been some concerns voiced by gas groups saying, hey, we should take the past couple of years as a lesson to the instrumental role the U.S. can play and should continue to play. And others have actually applauded the move, saying, make sure that you're not doing too much in the name of energy security. Make sure climate is considered too.
What is it about LNG that alarms some people who are concerned about climate change?
The biggest cause of concern is that the infrastructure that's required for LNG exports is substantial. It is expensive and it is large. And the idea is that it doesn't get built if it's not intended to be used for a couple decades or longer. And so the environmentalists are concerned that while, yes, right now we use a lot of gas. Yes, right now, gas helps displace coal. Do we really want to lock ourselves into the gas's role for that long of a timeline when we could instead try to leapfrog gas potentially and go from coal straight to renewables? So that's really where the concern is.
Well, let's go back to that politics, which you said was all important at the top. So do you think environmentalists will be satisfied with the nod, if you see what I mean? Enough to say, I hear you, I acknowledge you, but I'm not actually changing that much.
You know, that's a great question. I mean, the way that the response has been so far is, that's nice, you know, so what else? Or what do you kind of promise if you were reelected? Where do you take this, right? Because right now, this is being couched as a freeze. It is temporary. It is about reevaluating the criteria that is used to approve projects. It is not being couched as we are putting a full stop to them. Now, there are a lot of environmentalists, that's exactly what they want, right? So the Biden administration right now is kind of keeping its options open. Yes, maybe something more substantial could come in a second term, but it's not guaranteeing. It's kind of hedging its bets.
Well, it's very interesting for us involved in this world because it suggests that climate might actually have quite an important role in the next, what are we now, 10 months or so.
Yes, definitely.
Katie Merriman, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Absolutely, thank you.
Reducing emissions from our cars, both when they're being driven and when they're being built, is a big part of our journey towards net zero. Indeed, the Mini itself was conceived as a result of an energy crisis, the Suez crisis, nearly 70 years ago now, when they wanted to make a smaller, more economical vehicle. But now, here at Mini Plant Oxford, in the age of electrification, they're taking things to a whole new level. This is Mini's assembly line in Oxford, and it's about to undergo an electric transformation. What's going on all around me?
We're building cars, we're building Minis. This is the building we call Body in White. We, with just over 1,000 robots, are assembling metal panels that are pressed in our press shop down in Swindon. We weld them in here, and we are going to repurpose the line we're actually above at the moment. This is a framing line with £600 million worth of investment in the next few years, where we integrate into this production system a brand new, fully electric car.
Reusing the same assembly line used for conventional Minis will save on construction emissions, but also keeps the local workforce employed into the future.
The investment that we're making, the £600 million, is securing this workforce's jobs well into the future, into the 2030s. It's about 4,000 people we have on site at the moment, and that carries on for that period.
And the vehicles are nearly complete now. How do they get from here to the actual customer?
Yeah, so they go through their final quality checks. You see they're being performed in front of us at the moment, to the dispatch yard, where most of them get loaded on a train, where they're taken to the docks in Southampton. That takes about 50 lorries a day off the roads, and then they go off to more than 100 markets around the world.
Car making is a very energy-hungry process, but up on the roof, the company is generating part of that themselves.
We've got approximately 11,500 square metres of panels on this roof and a couple of others on the site. As part of the future investment, the £600 million for this new electrified car, we're building a couple of new structures on site, extending the body shop and extending the logistics warehouse. They will have panels on as well. So almost doubling the size of the panels over the next few years.
Despite the government delaying the deadline for all new cars being fully electric, this place will still make the switch by 2030, securing the future of a British classic into the electric age. We're off to a break now, but when we come back, for Pete's sake, how farming carbon is helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now to a new initiative that's trying to prevent peatland from emitting carbon dioxide and warming the atmosphere, something it does often when it's drained. Now, outside Lancashire, they're beginning to re-wet a big area of peat bog, and it's working for the landowner too. Mickey Carroll has put her boots on to find out how it's all happening.
This is no ordinary bog. This is a super bog, and it's going to earn its keep. The Wildlife Trust is farming it for carbon.
we're essentially growing a permanent cover crop of sphagnum mosses for the purposes of protecting and storing carbon in the peat soils. So the product of this carbon farm is essentially the carbon that we are protecting in these peat soils here and sequestering in the longer term from the atmosphere.
It's the first project of its kind in the UK. The idea is to make restored peat pay for itself. As it sucks up CO2 from the atmosphere, the government and private businesses will pay to keep that carbon in the ground.
So wetlands are naturally waterlogged, nutrient-poor, acidic places, and it takes very specialised plants such as sphagnum moss, which I'm holding here, to grow and thrive in these conditions. As it grows, the bottom layer decays but doesn't decompose properly, so then all the carbon that is sucked out of the atmosphere is locked into the peaty soils for millennia.
This plant, sphagnum, is capable of holding 20 times its own weight in water, which you can tell when you squeeze it like this. And it's what helps keep this peatland really nice and wet. But in the UK, we've drained loads of our wetlands and peatlands. In fact, here in the northwest, there's no healthy lowland peat left. And all of that drained peatland is contributing massively to our greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. In fact, the carbon emissions from drained peatland make up 6% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. That's the same as aviation. Dr. Chris Field and his team have been measuring how much CO2 the bog has sucked up since the project began 4 years ago.
We're still losing carbon a little bit, but we're only losing something like 2 tonnes. So we've mitigated or reduced those emissions by sort of 90 to 95%.
Normal bogs wouldn't necessarily work as carbon farms, so the team have modified this one.
Our rationale for this experiment, or this pilot, was to densely plant sphagnum moss, because we think that bogs that have more sphagnum moss on them store more carbon. But actually, it is economically beneficial for farmers in that situation to maybe think about sort of changing the land use to either restoration or carbon farming, as we've called this, because the potential to earn money from carbon offsetting income is there, and actually I think it's probably more lucrative than grazing animals.
But 4 years ago, this swamp was working farmland, and lots of our agricultural peat is used to grow food. The Wildlife Trust doesn't think that all peatland should be turned back into bogs, but finding that balance is something the Farmers Union is worried about.
There are just so many challenges around land use at the moment. There's the opportunities around energy. We hear about carbon storage, tree planting strategies. We've got to get biodiversity recovery right. The government wants to deliver clean air, clean water. All of these challenges are there. And at the moment, the budget to deliver all of these environmental outcomes simply doesn't exist.
But getting swamped down in the finer details is still some way off. This superbog still needs to prove it can pay its way before farmers will be reassured they can give over any of their land to restoration.
There was a significant environmental win this week, which was all about litter. But you may not have seen it this way, because I'm talking about the government's announcement to ban disposable vapes because they cause huge harm to young people's health. But they're also a massive litter menace. And that's something that Laura Young has been campaigning about up in Scotland and around the whole country. Laura, how did you react to the news?
Absolutely delighted to see this ban that's come in place. It is, of course, for both health reasons and the environment, and it's great to see this across the UK.
When you talk about them being a waste problem, can you give us any idea of the sort of scale of the litter problem that you've seen from disposable vapes?
There is a significant problem with litter. You find them everywhere, all the time. You'll see them in the gutter, in the parks, in the beaches. And we've had lots of citizen science projects showing just how many are found. But we actually use a substantial amount. 5 million a week are thrown away in the UK. And inside each of those, there are, lots of precious materials, a lithium-ion battery, cobalt, copper wiring, all sorts of really precious materials. And when those are thrown away, they will just go to landfill. So, of course, it's a huge amount of waste alongside a huge amount of litter.
But even if you do put them in a bin, you're saying that's not the end of the waste problem that they cause?
No, and there's actually a huge problem here, because if you put them in the bin, in the regular general waste, they risk getting damaged. And of course, a lithium battery, if damaged, is a huge fire risk. And we've seen over 700 fires in the UK due to these vape batteries in bin lorries, in recycling centres, because they are inappropriately disposed of. But it's not easy, it's not clear where to put them. So technically they need to be recycled as a small electrical good. But we know that those recycling points are not really that accessible. Vape shops have been hardly putting these in place. And so it's really difficult for consumers to know what's the right thing to do. And then when they do know, it's really hard for them to find a place to recycle them.
Pleased about the ban. What about the enforcement of it?
We have about a year until this becomes legislation. So we need to make sure that over the next year we get the most robust piece of legislation that makes sure that the industry don't find loopholes and ways to still produce products that are really environmentally damaging. And we need to work with retailers in the meantime to say, how are you going to help us collect and recycle these? And of course, there's a bit of consumer behaviour as well. We want people to know and understand their responsibility. But really, the big influence we need to have now is on the industry.
Now, pretty much every weekend is a football weekend, but this is Green Football Weekend, where it's hoped to unleash the power of the sport to tackle climate change. It comes at a time when FIFA's dedication to the cause is being questioned, as they announced a World Cup over 3 continents and 6 countries. Think of all the flying between the matches. Sky Sports presenter David Garrido sat down with former Arsenal player Matthew Flamini, who's had somewhat of a change of tack since leaving the game.
Thank you so much for coming in. And aside that storied playing career you've had with Arsenal and AC Milan and others, we know that you're a big climate advocate and you're an ambassador for Green Football Weekend as well. So we're going to take a little bit of a journey through your journey, and thank you for going deep into the camera roll for this one as well, for sharing some of your personal photos. So just tell us, what was your first experience or memory of any kind of environmental issue in your life, Matthew?
So first of all, I remember a long time ago going to the sea with my dad. My dad used to be a diver by passion, and he used to take me with him when he used to go and dive. So, and I remember those collectors of plastic on a beach. For hours. So already at the time I was very much aware of the impact of the humankind on nature. And since then, I grew up in a direction of hoping to be able to bring my small contribution and to tackle climate change, because it is something which impacts all of us.
It really does. You mentioned ocean pollution there. Let's just take a little stroll here. That's one thing, plastic pollution, but ocean health as a whole, why is it so vital for our planet? For those who don't really follow the issues quite so closely as you do, just explain that. Here we are, Surfers Against Sewage. You're making a pledge here to protect the ocean. The lungs of the planet, they are so important for us as well, aren't they?
Of course. We say that if the ocean dies, we die. Why? Because obviously we need the oxygen from the ocean. The ocean also helps to regulate, the CO2 emissions. And we also, with fish, the sea is providing a lot of food for everybody. So it is very important to protect it. We talk a lot about plastic, which is of course important, but the question is also what is inside the product we use every day. Because plastic is one problem, but also all those ingredients which come from fossil fuel, it's another big issue.
Levulinic acid. This is what you do, right? This is what your company makes. This is what could make a big change in the world. Really briefly, because we're a little short on time, Matthew, what is it? Why could it be a game changer?
I'm going to make it very short. I think what people need to know is that in a product we use every day, going from shampoo, shower gel, detergent for the house, most of those products are still today made of fossil fuel ingredients. Wow. So what we do at Jeff Biochemicals, we are replacing those nasty ingredients by plant-based ingredients, which makes the end product, so the shampoo, the shower gels, the detergents of tomorrow, much safer and much sustainable for everyone.
Well, that's it for this week. Remember, you can catch up on all your climate and environment news on the Sky News website and app, or by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now. Cheerio.